Brad, the Stupid Boy by Brendan Bozeman. Brad was always a funny child. At least his parents said so if they weren't calling him stupid. He had a lot of funny things about him, such as sleeping with his teddy bear propped up on his bedside table so it could keep a better eye on him. He had a habit of saying goodbye to people when he was introduced to them, quote, to save time later. He regularly changed the name of his dog whenever the name of the month changed. But the term didn't really stick until he was 7 years old and ran out into traffic twice in a week. The first time, a car hit him on the hip and left a large, angry bruise that didn't allow him to sleep on his left side for 3 days. It happened because he was playing in the front yard and charged after a ball that had gotten out into the street, even though he had been warned many times not to chase after balls that got out into the street. His mother had rushed after him, practically fainting with what appeared to be relief. This alone, however, did not confirm him as funny. What made him funny was that a few days later, walking with his mother back from the market, he again ran into the road, this time to jaywalk, and got hit again. First, his mother berated the driver, throwing canned goods at his car and cracking the passenger window. Then she berated Brad. "Why did you run into the road? I've told you 1,000,000 times not to run into the road." "I ran into the road the other day." "What?" "Yes, but nothing happened." "What?" "So obviously cars can't do anything to you. I mean, they hurt, but they can't kill you." Brad's mother seized him by the hand and dragged him home again and had him sit on the living room couch. All she could think to say was, "Don't run into the road." She pointed at him, her fingers shaking. "Ever!" She started to cry, displaying that she knew her words would have no effect. "Cars can hurt you." "That's what I said," said Brad meekly. Her despair was not just for Brad, but for herself. His way of thinking had slowly gutted a hole in her heart. He was destined for unemployment and poverty, ill health and depression, and all she could do was watch him fail. Brad was not slow or retarded or special or gifted or any of the other insults or euphemisms one might label him with. He just had a strong propensity for making unusual decisions. Running in front of a car wasn't based on ignorance, but rather on a unique, some would say idiotic, application of logic. That night at dinner, his mother, looking to her husband for commiseration, said, "Now Brad ran in front of a car." George lowered his head. "How can you be so stupid?" he said. It wasn't a question, just a wretched acknowledgement of fate. Brad was told to go to his room and do his homework. It wasn't a punishment. It was just that his parents couldn't bear to watch how he would do it, and they knew they would not be able to help him. Brad, too, had been dreading this assignment. It was in his most hated subject, drawing. And it was to draw something, quote, special to your parents. That implied he would have to show it to them and get it signed. Laboriously, he drew his parents sitting on a bench in front of their house and smiling. He knew he had no chance of making a convincing forgery of his parents' signatures. He had, in fact, tried it before. So he took it downstairs and placed it on the coffee table in front of the TV. His mother barely glanced at it. but his father gave it a good, long look. "Those are very good-looking dogs," he said. "Good job." Any observer of the behavior of Brad's parents would surely be outraged by them, or they would not believe that any parents could treat their child that way. Would their parental love not win out over any vexations? It would be debatable whether Brad was born with his odd outlook and strong weaknesses, as his teacher would sometimes put it, but they had not been able to form him into the creature they had hoped for in the hour of his first breath. Any normal parents of our day would note that most of their job is being present and staying stoic, with a minority of it reserved for joy and gratitude. They know that God's clay is enough to form a decent person. Sadly, that did not appear to be the stuff Brad's parents were made of. George signed it with a dismissive air and went back to reading his paper. Brad stayed in the living room and played with blocks in the corner, half listening to the TV. "You know," his father said without provocation, "you're actually going to be the ideal man, aren't you?" Unfortunately, Brad thought he was right. He thought so because of his schooling. He had learned all about history from school and from his father. Mankind was not at its best in the present generation, and that was intentionally so. The first wave of industrialization and technology had brought with it hope for an easy and harmonious future for mankind, but it had resulted in disease, war, death, the crushing of the human spirit, and making man into an automaton that did little more than go on the internet. This was all reset after the first wars. The population was down. The earth had been laid waste. Technology was a rarity. But as things were reorganized, technology and industrialization came back, along with artificial intelligence, and new wars set everyone back all over again. Then there was a new set of growth, punctuated with a period by the rise of neo-Nazism, and after a long era of stability, internal decay set in. Society ground to a corrupt, inefficient, and listless flop. A few half-hearted wars later, and society was right back where it had started. Then there was a serious effort made at communism, which failed for many of the same reasons. Then pure libertarianism, which worked for a time but got taken over by monopolists who synthesized neo-Nazism and communism. In the end, every effort at organizing society had foundered once corruption and the inability of mankind to keep its mind on any one thing had ruined all the progress and, quote, sent them back to go, do not collect $200. An expression that had returned during Brad's lifetime. The retrogression was nearly complete. People became not quite hunter-gatherers, but not quite early farmers. These things were known because of archaeology during the organized periods. Progress took place, but this time very slowly, in a controlled manner, until the world was just about what it would have been in the 1940s. And it stayed that way. In Brad's time, by general consensus, mankind had decided that the best thing to do was give up trying. They only wanted to smooth out the worst suffering, keeping everyone in a state of near misery and leaving them unable to progress more than a very small amount. If things did start to progress too much, self-enforcing mechanisms were in place to destroy that progress, before it got off the ground. This included even discerning that there was such a plan at all. So, a constitution was formed that perfectly counteracted the happiness of mankind with corruption and greed, such that no one was ever very rich or very happy, but also not completely destitute. If, for some reason, progress or population crept back towards something hopeful, an entire nation of what were pointedly called the berserkers would come up from the ground and wage physical war on everyone and tear things back down for a generation or two. Brad's father had told him not to worry too much about that, however. There hadn't been such an outbreak in 500 years, and everything looked pretty stable and slow for the time being, like tectonic plates. Some wondered whether or not the berserkers were just a legend. Brad's homework was one small part of the workings of this society. Art was the most important subject in school. Only artists could expect to go to good colleges and get good jobs. And then they would perform their best service to mankind exactly as planned. Almost nothing, and possibly something bad. With no practical knowledge of organizing or maintaining any system, they were barely able to keep things going and were easy targets for organized crime and corrupt politicians, who were, in turn, easy targets for other organized crime and corrupt politicians. At school, mathematics was taught as a large amalgam of tricks and rules of thumb. A progression of topics, with one building upon the other, was avoided, and assignments were never corrected. Science was taught only incompletely and with a belief in, quote, subjective analysis. Students were expected to form hypotheses and then back them up with data that they would pick and choose. Skillfully finding such support was rewarded. Disproving a hypothesis was frowned upon. Any student who showed practical skill in this or any other area would receive poor grades and poor job prospects. When Brad turned in his assignment, his teacher first criticized him for making his parents' faces too realistic and for drawing hands that looked so lifelike. These are not necessary in a third-grade drawing, she said. You have to learn to stay in your lane. Then she praised him for having his parents sit on a bench in front of the house, which broke the convention of having them stand stiffly with one hand up, waving. Then she scolded him for drawing a lifelike frame in the margin of his paper. Are these little math problems decorating it? They have no place in an artwork. This method of teaching was far from thoughtless. She was following exactly the, quote, sandwich technique, close quote. The top piece of bread, criticism for the overall effort in order to maintain a student's expectation of mediocrity. The meat and lettuce, faint praise to keep a glimmer of hope alive. Lastly, the bottom slice of bread. Another round of criticism, ideally for doing something that showed initiative and which was not specifically asked for. The initiative would be scolded, and a skilled teacher would at that point lower the grade in front of the child as if she had just noticed this new deficiency. This would help to discourage the student from seeking help or believing in their own instincts. Today, the class was asked to write a creative composition. Then, they broke up into small groups to criticize each other's effort. Brad's would have been highly praised in another age. It was creative, interesting, showed good word choice, and told a good story that had a fresh but hard-to-define message. However, his peers said it had no point, complained that they couldn't even understand half the words, and questioned why he always wanted to show off with correct punctuation and good handwriting. "What are you, a girl?" they said. They did the same thing for each other, and then the teacher came by to pass her own judgment. "These are all okay, but not something for the refrigerator," she said. She picked out one student, Chrissy, and told her she was too negative about the other's work. "You're one to criticize," said the teacher, "considering the garbage you chose to read to everyone else." It wasn't personal. There just had to be a so-called, quote, bad one in every situation. It comforted everyone else to know someone else had it worse. Seeing one student cry, or at least struggle not to, made everyone else feel better. They had all been the bad one at one point or another, and it nurtured a culture of, quote, sympathetic mediocrity, as their teaching philosophers put it. They knew how confused Chrissy was that she was scolded for doing what she was supposed to do. She would try to do worse the next time. Brad generally agreed with the way this world was set up, and as he grew older, he settled into the comfort of knowing no one else was doing very well either, and that if somebody was doing well, the others could safely tear them down. And this is why he knew he would be the ideal man. He was developing no useful skills, he had a knack for poor judgment, and he was good enough at art to learn how to keep it acceptably poor. However, Brad was sometimes seduced by the temptation of trying to do a good job anyway. This desire was not a character trait. Rather, it came from a nagging curiosity about the berserkers. To him, they were the ultimate badasses, a word he had learned from an older boy. The last word in tearing things down, both the worst and the best at the same time. For reasons Brad could not guess, his teachers avoided questions about them, saying, "Just you forget about them." But he couldn't forget about them, and he deduced that if he could spark a little progress, it might draw them out. In fact, they sparked his first truly independent idea. He understood averages through the fog of his teacher's methods, and he had reasoned that, on a scale of 0 to 10, including 0, a key point that his teacher seemed to cover up from him, the ideal for any citizen was a 5. But if you were an 8 on some days and a 2 on others, you would average as a 5. So if the berserkers were so bad they were a 0, and so good at what they do they were a 10, weren't they also the perfect average citizens, while also being the worst and the best? Over the years, he worked to get punished as much as possible and to get the worst grades he could. This he achieved by studying math and digging up some very arcane knowledge about the scientific method. If he was being punished, he reasoned that he was doing something that would do good for mankind and get those berserkers moving. Little by little, he identified others like to himself with talents that would have created the old-time progress-oriented societies of the past, and he communicated with them surreptitiously. They found it surprisingly easy to put together a network of people and gather information from the old days that would allow technological advancement. People like librarians were so unskilled and lax that it was easy to gain access to information once they had the courage and the will. Even if books were sequestered in faraway warehouses, they could still break into them. Their progress was extremely rapid. By the time they were 17, they had developed their own underground economy, and since they were just recreating old technologies, they did not have to go through all the trial and error of real innovators. And they started getting something both wonderful and universally reviled: rich. Wealth is, however, never easy to hide. It's easy for an individual who can stay focused, but a network of the rich will sooner or later start giving out signals, and others will become jealous. They kept themselves prepared and armed, however, and by their mid-20s would have been on their way to ruling the world when the berserkers broke out. They burst forth suddenly on land, sea, and air in a worldwide blitzkrieg that left everyone, including Brad and his conspirators, reeling. To everyone's surprise, they had astounding machines of transport and stunning weapons. They burned cities, torched suburbs, blew up bridges, executed people en masse. They did everything 10 times worse than Brad ever could have conceived. After only 36 hours, Brad found himself fleeing in treeless hills, without shoes, wearing nothing but torn pants and a t-shirt stained with blood. A berserker flying machine, or something, Brad had never seen anything fly before, caught up to him. Its .50 caliber machine guns trained themselves upon him. This was the end, he knew. He had seen them at work on fellow citizens and a few cows. Facing death, Brad was happy that it would be quit, but regretted what he had done. How much easier would it have been to remain a gray, mediocre grain of sand on society's windswept shores? But a voice came from the machine. "Brad Pershing?" He was on his knees, but he looked up and nodded yes. The machine landed, and a man wearing strength-enhancing body armor came out. "Do you wish to come with us?" Brad had no idea. He didn't know the criteria for the question. He didn't know whether yes or no would be the right answer. If he said yes, that might show curiosity, and they would kill him. But if he said no, then no might mean no, and they would do away with him anyway, or, even worse, fly off and let him wander, dejected and alone, wondering for the rest of his life what would have happened if he had said yes. But even still, maybe the berserkers wanted somebody who would say no, someone contrarian and destructive, someone who cared little for his fate and sought only adventure. The man repeated himself. "Do you want to come with us?" He started to turn away. Brad let curiosity win, leaped to his feet, and said yes. The man pointed at the door to the machine, and Brad got in. "You're lucky," said the man. "I almost blasted you from a mile away. You wouldn't have even heard the missile. Your body would have just been a pink mist." He laughed. "But I looked at the facial recognition, and what the hell? There he was, Brad Pershing." "What do you want?" "No, what do you want? We're the top people here. The Eloi, the aristocrats, the Bolsheviks, the Führers, the kings and queens, the information neos." Information neos? They don't teach that in school. What do you mean? You guys are really so stupid sometimes. What were you taught your whole life about society that never changes no matter what? That progress leads to corruption and war, and we keep it to a manageable level. Yes, close. There's always a top dog in the corruption pile. For this world, it's us. We leech the wealth off all these plebs, and we give them an ideology that keeps them miserable and content to be miserable. They don't even understand who we are. I bet you thought we berserkers were some kind of savages living in caves and drooling over raw meat. Something like that. But the reality is so very different. Most of what we do comes from the communists. They were just so close to having everything right. They just needed a few tweaks to have a really durable society. We figured it out. Genius, I say. Especially if you're on top. The berserkers are really at the top? Yup. Is all that history false? Pretty much. A lot of it's true, but we made up a lot of stuff too. Mostly just to make it into a story that's easier to understand. Did you really think history is that clear-cut? I never thought about it. That means it worked. So did making you think you had an idea about how all this works. Didn't you notice that part of the plan was to make sure no one understood the plan? Yes. And you thought that somehow you were able to learn what the plan is from your father or from books? But it all made sense. Exactly. You had just enough hope. We knew there was something different about you way back. Most humans are just meant to be wretched. We think you've established yourself, though. You've graduated. What about my friends? What about them? This invitation is for you and you only. You can be in charge with us. You can know. But most people can't. Otherwise, we'd have chaos. Of course, if you don't want to stay with us, I'll set you back down and you'll be a pink mist in a few seconds. You'll never know what hit you. No, said Brad. Good. By the way, thanks. We haven't had fun like this in 500 years. Well, but so you've never done this before? I mean, not the berserkers. You personally haven't? The man let out a belly laugh. Oh, Brad, you'll learn. You don't know the half of it. First lesson for today. We live 1,000 years. 1,000 years? Thereabouts. Bet you're already glad you said yes. Believe me, Brad, you're going to have fun.